if you don't have your pulse, your thumb on the pulse of what's going on in the firm, you may have folks that are doing damage and not good. We've had some calls where people now have a new opportunity based on what we're hearing, with some disgruntled employees where they could sabotage, unfortunately, the calls. In one instance, one of the calls, they literally gave the phone number for a competitor. We can't help you here, but they can.
Wow.
So when I say, have you called you lately, owners really need to understand, what their folks are saying.
Yeah, that's kind of scary.
Welcome to the Direct Cremation Podcast with your hosts, Tyler Yamasaki and Will DeMichaelis.
Hi, thank you for joining us on the Direct Cremation Podcast. I'm your host, Will DeMichaelis, a funeral director with a decade of experience and former manager of the Omega Society, a cremation brand that serves over 4,500 families per year. And as always, I'm here with my co-host, Tyler Yamasaki, CEO of Parting Pro. Today, we're talking with Nicki Wiedeman from Dead Ringers, the death care's premier mystery shop provider. Dead Ringers specialize in systematically helping individual funeral homes improve their phone etiquette. They've mastered the art of customer service and help funeral home teams level up and serve families better. Please welcome Nicki.
Thank you.
Yay.
Yay.
Good to have you, Nicki. Claps all around.
Great to be here.
Yeah, awesome. I was visiting your website, and I'm a licensed funeral director, and I was unclear as what a mystery shopping call was. So kind of to set the stage for the rest of our conversation, can you explain what a mystery shopping is for our listeners?
Absolutely. There are companies that use mystery shoppers throughout all kinds of professions and industries, and we've narrowed in just to death care. Secret shopper is a word that we use sometimes too, mystery shopper. And we partner with our clients and we will pose as families. Could be an imminent situation, a pre-need call, and calling in just to see the basics at first, how the phone is answered, to how our questions are addressed, and we record those and then share them with management and ownership of our firms. And then we can deploy training based on what we've heard. So we got started about 7 years ago. And at this point, we've placed 8,500 phone calls throughout the US and Canada. So we have a team of what we call our dead ringers who place the calls. And we do our best to fit demographics based on where the calls are being placed to. Gosh, we can really zero into lots of different things. So yeah, but it's just more or less pretending to be a family member, and we record those calls. And then there are certain states where there are legal requirements where we cannot do that. But
Oh, wow.
Our owner of our company is an attorney, and I think he's been on your podcast before. That's Paul Lemasters.
Yep. Yeah.
So
we like Paul.
I'm not going to do anything. CYA, that's his theme, if you're familiar with him.
Yeah.
So yeah.
When you're evaluating these mystery shop calls, what are the most common things that you uncover during that initial mystery shop call?
Surprising to me, and I've been in the profession for it'll be 33 years in February. So I've been around it. I got my start in pre-need, and I thought that I would be doing lots of technical things in the training that I provide through Dead Ringers. And what we're hearing, unfortunately, is a lack of empathy, which was shocking to me. So I've really had to take a step back in the way that I approach what I'm doing to kind of remind people why they got into the profession in the first place in helping families. So we're hearing tone of voice issues. We're hearing distraction. Someone may call in and mention that a loss is about to occur, and it's not even recognized by the person answering the phone. So offering condolences or providing those types of keywords and authentic ways of addressing that a loss has occurred or will occur is really missing. So empathy, unfortunately, is not being injected into these calls. So I think overall, that's the big arching issue that I share in my training. And we measure everything in the calls that we place. And one of the key questions we ask our dead ringers is, do you feel that empathy was shown as a part of this call? And I want to say 21% of the time do our dead ringers, who are as objective as possible, feel that they were addressed in a caring and empathetic way.
Wow.
That's really low.
Yeah, that's really low, and an unfortunate category to be low in, given the subject matter in business. Okay.
Yeah.
I can imagine that. I can see that being the case a lot of the time. So unfortunately, it's not that surprising. to me. It seems counterintuitive given the nature of the business, but ultimately not surprising and unfortunate to hear, I think. Tyler, do you want to touch on anything with that?
Yeah. Do you feel like empathy is something that can be taught? Or do you feel like that's how people approach it and that's just how they are and that's how their personality comes across? Or do you see significant changes when you can actually point that out to the staff?
Yeah, I think we become desensitized, especially for those firms that have a large volume of calls.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's an issue, in that if the phone is ringing and ringing and ringing, and you see red lights flashing on the phone and those kinds of things, we tend to get rushed. And I think what we're able to do at Dead Ringers and with our training is to kind of do a reset on, listen, guys, we do these types of things every day, all day, but for that person, they're the only one experiencing loss at that time. We don't know where they are in the grieving process. So it's just kind of a reminder of who's calling and where they're coming from. So that's a little bit of, I think, kind of a reset there. I don't know that empathy can be trained, but it can definitely be modeled,
right.
In the way someone answers the phone. And even though maybe someone answering a phone within our profession offers condolences, sometimes it's in a flat tone, our condolences. People aren't interjecting even their own personalities, I think, as they answer the phone. I think we're afraid that we'll offend people, but if we're genuine, I think that really comes across well. And our calls that tend to rank higher are those where names are asked for. Who's calling? Has a loss occurred? Just little simple things show empathy. How you place someone on hold.
Yeah.
Just instead of saying, hold, please, is it okay that I place you on a brief hold while I connect you with our professional here that's going to help you through that? Those types of things.
Make a big difference. Yeah.
Do you find a lot of variance between multiple staff members in showing empathy, or maybe any category for that matter? Or do you find that if we go to this funeral home, in general, their ranking is higher? If you go to this funeral home, their rankings are generally lower? Or do you feel like it's all over the place?
I think a lot of it comes from leadership, the owners of the firm, and that how they view their business and the importance of phone skills. And so we're always very excited when someone sees the need for phone training. I'm going to be brutal here, but there's some pompous personalities within this profession that think they do it right. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, have you called you lately? Do you really know? We assume we know what folks are talking about. And so, taking the steps to really understand how the phone is answered is so important. I was a member of the board of the Cincinnati College of Mortuary Science for about 10 or so years. And even at a school as great as that, there is no curriculum on phone skills. We train down to the minute pieces of how to make an arrangement or, how to build a service, all of those kinds of things. But in answering the phone, it's just something, okay, answer the phone. There's no key training or pieces around that, even from an educational perspective within our profession. So, but you did mention from firm to firm. What we find are the large conglomerate firms or national firms have training programs,
right?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
The corporate firms that we work with, because they base things on metrics, they do surveys, although a lot of firms do those types of things, but relying on data, I think sometimes is very important. From a difference perspective, that's kind of what we see there.
Will, did you, at Omega Society, did you have a specific script or a training program for the people that answered the phones?
I developed one when I took over training new hires. I would train and go through examples of how to answer the phone if it was a first call, and then break that down into the type of first call, tell people how to place people on hold, constantly refreshing that empathy and kindness and calmness is like the most important things. But prior to that, no, we didn't. And even when I came on, I had no phone training whatsoever. I was just told to sit at my desk and then answer the phone. And then I didn't answer the phone for like 6 weeks because I was like, I don't think they're going to have a good experience until I know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And I'm not valuable to this person on the phone. I'm only valuable to connect them with another person that has value to the questions that they're asking. I needed to educate myself first before I felt comfortable on the phone and like giving people actually a helping hand. And I don't know if that's common with other like small firms, but that was what was common with us.
It's great that you've injected training. I think that's so important. A lot of times with training, it's important, though, to kind of sharpen the saw, if you've heard that phrase. You do the training, but the way that you want your business handled is that sticking. And, I hear this all the time. Why we used to do that.
Yeah.
I'm like, why aren't you still doing it? So we get caught up in the day-to-day sometimes. And I think we really need to realize the very first impression. I think one is your Google. You Google a firm to call them. And then that second impression a lot of times is when you pick up the phone and call them.
Yeah.
So, that's where it all begins.
Yeah, I agree. Nicki, for funeral directors who want to stay on top of their teams, but don't have a scorecard to evaluate their team's phone etiquette, what categories would you suggest a funeral director, jot down and create a scorecard from so that they can kind of put some structure behind their feedback that they want to give to their own team?
Absolutely. Coming from a pre-need background, that we had scripts for everything, the types of leads that we get and all of that. But I find on the imminent and immediate needs of families, when a death has occurred, that scripting, I think, sometimes isn't appropriate. I think outlines and key things to hit on. But if you are scripting, it sounds really scripted.
Right.
And so you want it to be a genuine experience. So it's kind of key things that I think about is what is your greeting and what is your closing. So when you answer the phone, it should be answered the same every time. I call it the trifecta, a buffer statement, thank you for calling, the name of your facility, and then your name.
Right.
So those are just three very easy things. And starting off with that, I think there are two things that I always hit on with training: empathy and names. Those are the two things that I think are missing. And when you state your own name, it's almost a trigger to you that once the phone is answered, I say my own name, that I'm able to ask, for other people's names. So it's just, that's one piece. So the greeting and then the closing is not just saying goodbye, but what are you doing to take it to the next level? If it is a shopper or someone like that, are you, trying to close the loop where you have an opportunity to serve that family later? And so I think the greeting and closing is very important. I mentioned the use of names. So how are you going to do that throughout your call? Another is, how am I going to deploy empathy throughout this call? And then avoiding what I call missed opportunities, when it's like buying signals. I'm interested in cremation, and your podcast is called Direct Cremation, right? And people tend to go right to direct cremation, whether they offer, if it is a type of cremation society, that's what your model is. But full service funeral homes will go right to direct cremation instead of truly asking questions. So I tell the folks in my training, think of yourself almost as a reporter where you're asking questions. You don't want to get too in depth on that first call, but have you gone through this before? What can I do to help you if you have gone through that? So just understanding where people are coming from. What is your name? Little simple things like that.
Yeah.
Tell me what's going on. What can we do to help? So when someone asks for prices, we know we have to provide them on the funeral side of things. But a lot of times it sounds like we're reading our goods and services versus having, it's transactional versus asking questions. If someone says, I'm interested in cremation, well, what is it about cremation that interests you? Have you gone through this before? I am, certified cremation, whatever we can do to show that we're professional in what we do, and asking questions versus just spewing information.
Yeah. You've been in death care for a minute now. And, times have changed. Price shopping was maybe not something that was really that prominent 15 years ago. So what other things have changed since how you would have answered the phone 10, 15 years ago and today? Like what are things that we have to really focus on to make a good call that we didn't necessarily have to do back in the day?
Well, I think the internet has had a lot to do with how the profession has changed. And, having those types of interactions. Where I think things have changed, and it's not necessarily for small funeral homes and small markets, is that there's truly a transient society. So even in a large, I think we tend to think, well, our families are always going to come to us. And that's just not what's happening. So I think we have to give an elevated experience because our market has changed over the years, especially in those large markets. So, and generationally, boomers are not going to do what mom and dad did. The silent generation and the GI, the greatest generation, they were very loyal to businesses. But, I think boomers have really changed the profession in that way. So they expect an experience and they're the only ones making the arrangements in that way. So I think those are some of the changes that I've seen. Now, I do get some pushback about, well, we do lots of email arrangements and things like that. And I think technology will be important, but I still think that phones are an integral part of that, having a kind of a closed loop system. And I work with some clients where they have the most beautiful websites, but then you call the firm and it doesn't match up, if you know what I mean. So the experience online is great, but the phone experience is lackluster. So we'll look at the website. That's not our forte, but when a firm does a good job if they have content other than just obits.
Right.
So we want to, tie in an experience from the beginning to the end. And that's what we hope our firms will do.
I want to talk to you about a nuance on your site that I think is really important. You mentioned that you tailor phone questions to mix in open and close-ended questions. And I think that this is like huge. How do you use these questions? What are you looking for in a funeral home worker to nail when they are answering open-ended versus closed-ended questions?
A closed-ended question, as you know, is a question that elicits a yes or no answer. So the more that we're doing closed-ended questions, the more I think it's a one-sided conversation. So as I mentioned before, it's deploying, who, what, when, where, why, how, asking those key questions. And that will hopefully elicit an open-ended question, which creates a discussion. So, tell me a little bit about your dad, those kinds of things where you get a conversation started versus, just those yes or no questions. Some of the yes or no questions, was your dad a veteran? Yes or no. But I think those kinds of things are helpful in the arrangement conference. It's not necessarily what you want to do on the phone. Again, I'm very opinionated about, what happens when we do get into those phone calls, staying away from more of the transactional things and creating a relationship. It's so important to build trust early on in the call. So I don't know if that helps.
No, that does.
Yeah.
So it sounds like after you get a mystery shop, you then report it and they have to listen to it and actually see what their score was. And, I think I'm not alone, but listening to criticism about you can be very difficult. What's an effective way of delivering criticism that will actually inspire change versus creating defensiveness and shutting down?
Yeah. I was a little concerned about that myself as I got started. No one likes to hear the recorded voice. I'm going to hate it when this gets thrown out there, this podcast. Anyway, no one likes to hear the sound of the recorded voice. But what we found is we've had a few situations where we've angered some people. But in most cases, I think people find it refreshing. And that was really surprising to me, in that I had no idea I sounded like that. I get that a lot. It sounded like I was distracted, and those types of things. And we protect the innocent, as I say. So we're not playing calls to the entire group, if we're doing a training session or whatever that might be. So I think one-on-one support is very important. And I think if it comes from also the culture and climate of the firm, if there is kind of a defensive style within the business, that's probably how it's going to be portrayed. But if it's, an organization that believes in their people and also believes in the need to truly serve a family, we found that it's less of an issue with folks because they're expecting continuous improvement within their organization.
Right. Right. It's cultural. A lot of that is cultural. Yeah. How do you advise managing directors to handle team members who have issues following through and implementing change? our industry is going through workforce retention issues. And the last thing anyone needs or wants is for this type of consultancy to be taken the wrong way or be taken personally or just not be implemented.
Yeah.
Like I was at a firm that to some degree, people's arrangement styles were different and they were allowed to be different to a pretty large degree. And I found it effective at times, but I found that at certain times it was ineffective. So I want to kind of hear from you how you would advise a managing director deal with that issue.
It's private.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that's the way that it absolutely has to be. And I think once you get a basis of a program like with Dead Ringers, it's like, oh, now I know what to do. So I think someone's, here are the key things that'll make not only the experience better for the family, but the experience better for me.
Mm-hmm.
So any kind of feedback I provide one-on-ones as a part of what I do. I don't know about you guys, but I'm married and I can tell my husband something over and over again. But if a friend says it or someone else other than me, they're like, oh, that's a great idea. And so having someone else outside of the organization, I think can be helpful at times. But that one-on-one interaction, I think, is good. And then having a basis of what the expectation is when people answer the phone.
Mm-hmm.
I think everyone has their own style, but if we call it a skeleton outline, and so I mentioned that before, the key, the greeting, the closing, the asking for names, that you interject your own personality, but you're not missing those key things when you answer the phone. So,
do you have different expectations for teams during business hours versus after hours? And if so, how do they differ?
Yeah, I get a lot of questions about this. And actually, we are mistaken for answering services, within our business. They see a phone and they think we're an answering service. And I know in some instances, and you mentioned, staffing issues, we have to use an answering service, I think, because there just isn't the staff available after hours. So the expectation, I think, sometimes is that it will be an answering service. We've shopped answering services. Sometimes they do a better job than our funeral directors because they're forced to ask those questions. I need a name. I need to know why you're calling, and then you relay that information. I think in firms where they're busy and you have a lot of phone calls coming in, having what I call the gatekeeper, the facilitator of calls, some people will call them an operator, which I hate that, the admin answering the phone. And I really feel that position is sometimes underrated. That's that first point of contact, especially in a business location. So I feel their pain sometimes when they're searching for a funeral director or a cemetery counselor or whatever that might be, and someone's not available. So it's also understanding the dynamics of your team. I think it is very important.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. If you could create your ideal team and organizational structure to answer phones, what would it look like?
I think having one person when it's possible, and then the phone maybe trickles down to other folks. I know sometimes it's impossible if we have families and all of those kinds of things. If just funeral directors are answering the phone, it becomes a little dicey at times. So having someone manage the phone process, so whether it's an office manager, the gateway of someone that's answering the phone, and that's their sole job, maybe some other things along with that. In some instances with a smaller firm, that person may have different roles. Maybe it's handling paperwork, all of those types of things. But I think kind of would you call that a spoken wheel? So there's, the center of the organization is the person answering the phone, maybe having a team around them, and then transferring those calls on to the funeral director or cemetery professional. And pets too. We talk a lot. We have a lot of our clients that, offer pet cremation and those types of things. So that's a whole different animal in itself. So yeah. Yeah.
I think your spoken wheel analogy is really good. I want your opinion on, like, from what I hear from you, a lot of the issues that a firm could be having with phone etiquette could really be rooted in staffing problems that they have. And do you look at any type of phone data in your analysis to see if hey, no wonder this person has bad phone etiquette. They're getting 40 calls an hour and each call is 3 minutes long. No wonder they're being short with everybody that they're answering the phone
That's great. I think, thanks for the great idea. I learned something new in any kind of stuff that I do. I think that's great. We do have anecdotal information, I think, around that.
Yeah.
When I've done some training in firms, it's if there is a lobby or there's an office manager. These days, there's concierge. You see those, people that are greeting people, and a lot of times those folks are answering the phone. Funeral directors and staff are like hanging around the desk, and so so there's distractions. It's becoming like you're desensitized. At the beginning of the day, you're maybe in a great mood, and by the end of the day, you're dragging. So I think
you're dragged.
Staffing issues are there, and then I think a lot of times too is that it's not my job mentality.
Sure.
Kicks into. That's where, it's being a team. We are serving families, and everyone needs to step up if it's a busy day, to make sure our families are served. So, and I know a lot of times what I talk about is maybe pie in the sky, but just one little movement in the right direction can really, create a good experience. I don't have any solid data on those kinds of things, but I ask my clients, I'm like, how many calls do you get in a day? And I get all these different answers.
Sure.
So, the people answering the phone are like, yeah, we get 100 calls a day, maybe 20, from someone else. So I think that's really good data for firms to understand, overall management, how many times a day does our phone ring?
My brother showed me this. He worked in CX for a while. And if you can implement this, and any funeral director who wants better information about how they should be staffing for phones, there's it's available for free online. It's called an Erlang calculator. This Danish mathematician in 1917 basically created a formula where you input number of calls in a given time frame, the average length of the call, and what percentage of the calls you want answered within a certain amount of time. And based on all of that information, it will tell you how many people you should have staffed for that time. So it can actually, so it can actually help you. And then when you look at your phone data, you can say, oh, wow, we're not that busy from 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. And maybe that allows me to, maybe this person can stay off the phones and handle their families at this time. But from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., our call volume increases by 50%. And we need 2 people to be on phone so that everyone else doesn't get bothered. So that was something that really helped us and is available for anyone to use and, help get a little bit clearer picture about how to staff during busy times and not so busy times. I think that really helped us. I had no idea that existed. And I was in awe that some mathematician just devoted his whole life to call center optimization. And we're all just kind of benefiting from it now, which I think is kind of cool. So, yeah.
I worked for Forethought for years and then Global Atlantic. And our call center, literally, we knew down to the minute, because of metrics. Now, I don't know if the funeral homes, though, have that luxury, to have our calls tended to be repetitive, and we did, much difference than dealing with a family. And you mentioned the length of the call. We do measure that within Dead Ringers. What we're finding is it's almost 4 minutes, our call length on average, but talk time, because we measure that too, tends to be about 30 seconds less than that. So being put on hold is inevitable. And how we handle that, I think, is really important. So that's a key part of what we look at too. If I was put on hold, what was that experience like?
Right.
If I was transferred, did I have to repeat the story over again?
Right.
Those are, I think, the key little things. Just little things can make such a big difference when answering the phone.
You're absolutely right. And in a team where you put someone on hold, but the person that takes the baton and the next part of the call, if they know the story, can tell the story back to the client, use the client's name, then there's that continuity remains, and it's a much better experience for the family.
Yeah. Big
time. Yeah. That's a really good point, Nicki. Yeah.
Yeah. We call it a warm transfer. There's a cold transfer and a warm transfer. Yeah. And, we're showing warmth in what we do. And so I have what I call the handshake method. And if your technology will allow you within the funeral home or cemetery to merge a call versus just transferring a call. So you literally introduce the caller, say I am the gatekeeper, to the funeral director, state the person's name. I want to introduce you to the funeral director who's going to be helping you with your the services for your loved one. And so it's kind of, you're creating a family feel, I guess. Again, if you're in a really busy location, this can kind of sound like pie in the sky kind of stuff.
Yeah,
but I think it's important that we keep that in mind. And we're working on some things at Dead Ringers where we're able to, kind of like the gentleman with the CX that you mentioned, the measurements there, that based on how calls are answered, if I'm just providing information and not following through, what a loss for a shopper could be to my bottom line.
Oh, wow.
And so we're not engaging a shopper. And if I'm providing numbers and I'm not getting follow-up and all of that, what those missed opportunities are. So,
I can't wait for that.
Yeah, we're excited.
I have so many opinions. I mean, I personally believe that your phone etiquette can make or break your business in the funeral profession.
Big time.
Yeah. I've heard some great stories of, in my training where, someone says, I did a really good job in educating the family, but we were more expensive. So, I'm like, well, I'm not going to get that call because of price. And I love these stories where, the person called back and said, because the way you treated me, we're going to use you. And I think we assume that it's price driven. And I know, Tyler, you talk about this a lot. And what you do is that price is not necessarily the key indicator in why people are calling in. I think so many folks have not made this arrangement before or gone through the experience. And in their mind, maybe price is the only leverage they have because they don't know what a funeral means or what a cremation means. And they may look on your website, but they are not armed with the information. And if they are, it's going through their own filter versus what we can do to better educate them.
No, I definitely praise Will and Drew a lot because when you called Omega Society, when he was there, it didn't sound like you were calling a cremation society or a low-cost brand. It just sounded like you were calling an empathetic team that was there to help.
Yeah.
And, you can usually tell when you're calling someone who's either just trying to get you to come in right away or get you off the phone. There's a big difference.
Yeah. And we also cross-trained people with regards to pricing and like how to structure pricing conversations so that you didn't need to put someone on hold to like get an arranger on the phone and get them pricing. Like a non-zero percentage of our calls, we eliminated the need for any type of hold just because anybody answering it could give you the pricing for a direct cremation. It may not have been every service pricing, but at least we could give you direct cremation pricing, which we know is 85% of our business. So we felt better about people being able to do that than none at all.
Yeah. And I think it's important to point out, though, in certain states, funeral directors have to be the ones to provide pricing information. Okay. I'm thinking Ohio or, some of those states, but it is a luxury for those of us that can do what you do and training your staff. And it's knowing your product. That's what we offer. And if I stumble over what my product is, then I'm going to lose the call. And we hear a lot of that. One of our calls, the funeral director used the term ballpark figure to explain pricing. And I'm like, that's what a car salesman does. Yeah. It's the terminology I think is really important too. We do work with some cremation societies and, we tend to be much more transactional, I think, with those. It tends to be web driven. We're entering information along the way and it becomes very transactional. With one of the calls that I listened to, the caller, she does a really good job in answering the calls, but the terminology, so we can have you out the door for $1,300. I mean, so we have to be cognizant and self-aware of the terminology and the things that we use. So I think it's really important to keep those things in mind and be self-aware.
Yeah, it's important to do that, to be grounded and be centered as to kind of what vernacular you use. You don't know what can rub someone the wrong way. You know that your communication can be effective, but is it right for the circumstance?
Nicki, how many customers have you engaged with where when you listen to their calls, they had almost no changes that they needed to make and their calls were perfect?
0. No, I mean, we do grade on a scale of 0 for 1 to 100, in all of the key areas that we take a look at. There are 10 key areas. I don't want to spend a lot of time on those today, but our average score throughout the profession at this point, after 7 years and 8,500 calls, is 65 out of 100. And it's so simple just to pick up on the little things that make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
I think, as you mentioned, well, everyone has their own style, in the way that they do things. And if you don't have your pulse, your thumb on the pulse of what's going on in the firm, you may have folks that are doing damage and not good.
Mm-hmm.
We've had some calls where people now have a new opportunity based on what we're hearing, with some disgruntled employees where they could sabotage, unfortunately, the calls. In one instance, one of the calls, they literally gave the phone number for a competitor. We can't help you here, but they can.
Wow.
So when I say, have you called you lately? Owners really need to understand, what their folks are saying. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of scary.
I don't want to be a Debbie Downer here, but we feel really proud that we're putting our eye back on something that's important. I think we get caught up in technology. That's the future, and it may be, but
There's no reason that your phone etiquette has to go to the toilet because you can use a computer. Those don't seem to have any relation to me. I actually think that the better your online presence, the easier it should be for you to have good phone etiquette, because you should be getting less calls, allowing you more time to give good experiences on those calls.
Mm-hmm. So there's room for improvement, definitely.
As always, right?
Nicki, where do you think everyone's expectations are? I guess what I'm trying to get at is, I think everyone that listens to this is probably thinking, I'm caring, I'm empathetic, I'm good with families. I would score on the higher end. But what I'm going to assume is that most have not heard themselves talking to a family on the phone. So they come in thinking that they're going to actually score and perform a lot higher than they actually do. Do you find that to be the case?
I think we've surprised some folks too, that they know they really need phone training and they do a better job than they think they do. Again, as I mentioned, it's, we do no wrong. We're a great firm. We have this name recognition, all those types of things, but you really need to listen. And you don't have to use dead ringers. Just have a friend call in and see how that goes, And if you're well trained, you shouldn't stumble over things. When, I think that has a lot to do with it as well. When we get into those pricing discussions, well, what does this $6,400 represent?
Mm-hmm.
Are we able to share what the prices mean? So it's understanding your product and not stumbling around. I've had a few folks say, I know my score is going to be amazing. And in one instance, I had someone that did that. The firm, they were away, and she's like, I have faith in my staff back home. We called and we got voicemail.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You don't get cases. Not picking up the phone. That's probably the biggest thing. You got to answer it. You got to be on the field to play, type of thing.
We don't try to be too tough. We are objective and we don't nitpick. It's just, these are basic questions. Did you feel that empathy was shown? Did they ask for your name during the call? And did they ask if you had more questions? Did they provide follow-up opportunities? Was it easy to understand what they were explaining? Mm-hmm. Just simple things like that. One of the key questions we asked is, did they use terms that were unfamiliar to you? So are folks using terms that necessarily, they aren't meaningful for consumers, but they are to us? Mm-hmm. The word at need, that's our word. Right. Pre-need, right. That's our word. We'll hear acronyms like DC, which means death certificate. Ooh. We get, I think, caught up in the day-to-day where we need to understand who the audience is and using a language that's meaningful to consumers.
That's a very important point you just made. I think we all talk about things that we're very comfortable with, assuming that the other person is just as comfortable. I do that with my own team sometimes, without providing any context and, having the other person not be as familiar with the things that you're speaking about. They have no idea what you're talking about. Mm-hmm. Death care is one of those things where people are statistically going through it, once a decade, maybe. And here you are doing it every single day using vocabulary that no one else may really understand or even use in their daily life.
Yeah. I do have a nugget from my preemie days from an actuarial standpoint with insurance is that when it comes to spouses, male and female, the woman tends to outlive the man by 8 years. Now that may have changed, but so you're right. Like you make arrangements for dad, and then 8 years later, it's unfortunately probably mom. So you're pretty close there with the 10-year period. So yeah, and things change. Offerings change even in that short, not short, but over a 10-year period. The offerings truly change. Technology changes. We use video now. We stream services. There's just so many different things that 10 years ago we were just on the cusp of offering. So, yeah.
I think that's a good segue into our final question. We usually get people here who have a certain idea about this last question based on their own personal experiences within death care and what they're seeing. And so it's always great to hear this perspective from you. What do you think death care looks like in 10 years?
I do think technology will have a lot to do with it. I also think that disposition is really changing. And I noticed one of your guests before was water cremation. There's going to be new ways of approaching death, not just through cremation and burial. Alkaline hydrolysis, that's, something that we're seeing, as well. More the nature type, green burial will really, I think, take off. That's my gut feel. And as, in 10 years, millennials and even some Gen Zs will be probably involved much more in the funeral arrangement process. So whether it is visuals, I think there are some firms that were really ahead of the game even 10 years ago. I think it's Hollywood Forever, where they actually have videos on the headstones, those types of things where there truly is, I think, the technology to do those things now and embrace those kind of things. So I think technology will have a lot to do with it. So, and I do have a concern, as you do, Will, in that staffing, the industry is going to have to do a little bit of a tweak in how we find good people,
how we keep them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's something that has me a little nervous, but I think there's so many opportunities for the profession in 10 years from a technological standpoint and an array of choices that we haven't had before. So,
yeah, I share your worry about attracting good talent and retain talent in this industry long term. Mm-hmm. I see that. I see this industry struggling like it has for a long time in that. So we're trying to, do whatever we can to make it a little less daunting or a little bit more attractive to younger folks to help our...
And the celebrant, I'm a certified celebrant. I think that's going to be really important too, because folks are less likely to go to church. I mean, that's just the way society's going, I think. And to have that where we're truly celebrating the life, doing the storytelling, having those types of skills. I believe one of your guests, was it Glenda? I mean, the importance of celebrating a life is, it's key. And that is an amazing experience to have that designation, to be a certified celebrant. And again, having a plethora of offerings. I think we've gone from a la carte pricing to packages, and then we go back, and so it's, we have to change with the times. And I think sometimes we make changes to benefit the profession, not necessarily the families that are calling in.
Right.
Agreed.
So that was a long-winded answer to that.
No, that was good though.
It was an open-ended question.
Open-ended question.
Very good. Very good.
You nailed it.
Yeah. So where can people find you?
Our best bet is our website, and it's deadringers.co, not .com. .com will take you to a jewelry site in Australia, but we wanted to use that. So deadringers.co. And a lot of what I've talked about today, we have some recorded pieces. We did a cringeworthy calls series, so there's a lot of good things there. We're also embracing the 6 pillars of customer experience. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but we've injected that. Mm-hmm. We did a series on the 6 key things that ranges from personalization to process stuff. So I think that's some really good data there. So,
nice. Yep. For entertainment's sake, Cringeworthy Calls is definitely something that you should check out and definitely interesting. It's wild sometimes the things that you actually are able to record.
It's wild what
And we
people
have some-
say to families. It's wild what people say to people. Like, what the heck?
Yeah, we've had some really good experiences though too, and I love to share those good experiences.
Yeah, good.
And you can tell when someone is well trained and genuine at the same time. That they're not scripted, but they're asking the right questions. And it takes a special person. And like, I have a friend that says, I'm not a funeral director, but I'm a groupie, and I've taken that on. And that, we have an amazing profession. And yeah,
I agree.
Agreed. All right. I think this one will be really helpful. Nicki, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And thanks everyone for listening.
Yeah.
Please like, comment, and subscribe. And as always, for the Direct Cremation Podcast, I'm Tyler Yamasaki with my co-host, Will DeMichaelis. Thanks for listening. Thank you so much for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. If you ever want to know more, please find us at directcremation.com.